All welcome, friends. Today, I will analyze Bitcoin in detail from the point of view of cycles. I will also tell you my expectations regarding a more local structure. Let's figure out in general when the current bullish cycle can potentially end, yes, when Bitcoin will enter a bearish phase. So, first of all, Bitcoin cycles are directly tied to halving. In other words, the reward for miners is gradually decreasing, and over time, it becomes more and more difficult to mine new Bitcoins. This happens once every 4 years, and cycles are actually tied up for this. So, I marked the 3 previous halving dates of Bitcoin on the chart, so this is a 4-year cycle, respectively, in which a bull market occurs, a bear cycle occurs, that is, an accumulation phase, and, accordingly, after the next halving of Bitcoin, the next phase of the bull market begins, in which a pump also occurs. Then a strong correction, a bear cycle accumulation phase. I'll show you some interesting patterns. First of all, what period did the phase occupy before the formation of the maximum in the ordinary market? From the halving of Bitcoin. In the cycle of the 17th year, it took 526 days, followed by the previous bullish cycle of the 21st. We also note before the formation of the maximum, we see that it took 547 days. That is, approximately exactly the same numbers, right? And we also look at the current cycle. The last halving of Bitcoin took place on April 20th of the 24th year. So we celebrate approximately, yes, 540 days, for example. 546 days conditionally turns out to be October 25th. We looked at this. Next, what period did the vertex formation take from the previous cycle to the next one? So in this cycle, it took 1,423 days. Now we look at the last cycle of the 21st year in exactly the same way. We note from Hay approximately the same values of 1,400 and more days. And we get approximately October of the 25th. This is in terms of cycles. You can also still consider many options. You can look from the consolidation phase, that is, when Bitcoin formed its bottom, to the formation of the maximum. Here we consider from this point, that is, from the moment when Bitcoin crossed the uptrend for 608 days. In this cycle, if we look from this point, for example, yes, respectively, as you can see, more than 800 days have already passed. Cycles tend to stretch a bit, but somehow this all suggests that Bitcoin is approaching the formation of its peak in this cycle. Also, if you look at the timings from the end point of the downtrend, that is, it is to consider the moment when Bitcoin was constantly in a downtrend and formed a bottom point before the formation of a high on the next cycle. In the previous cycle, it took 1,083 days approximately. If you look at the current cycle, yes, we have a bottom formed at this point, that is, here Bitcoin completed its downtrend. There was a consolidation phase, and after that it moved into an uptrend. We also note approximately 1,000 plus 1,080 days, and this also converges with the previous values. That is, approximately October. Everyone should understand cycles, this is such a thing, yes, we consider everything over a long distance, respectively. These values may differ slightly, yes, for several months. But everyone should understand that with a very small probability, the bullish trend phase will take conditionally twice as long, until the 26th or 27th year. For example, the cycle may end a few months earlier, or it may be delayed and, accordingly, end a few months later. But one way or another, the completion of this cycle is more likely to occur in the 25th year, in the fall. Approximately, we can navigate in terms of cycles for October-November of the 25th. Also regarding the Bitcoin Dominance Index. If we consider the moment when the dominance was on the hay, that is, Bitcoin was in a bearish trend for a long period. Respectively, it absorbed the main liquidity. Then the alt season began, that is, a strong phase of decline in the Bitcoin Dominance Index and a new bearish cycle. If we consider these points exactly from the moment of a recoilless strong decline to the formation of the next peak, from which the next alt season also began. In the last cycle, it took 1,405 days approx. If you calculate from these maximums to the current values, you can see that today these values are already at the 1,616 days mark. That is, from the point of view of dominance, also if we consider the point of formation of the bottom, and take into account the entire uptrend. Also, we have dominance already approaching its case of this cycle. Therefore, from the point of view of cycles, my personal opinion is, yes, this phase of the bull market, can potentially end in the fall of the 25th year. Next, I will show important patterns from the point of view of the technical structure. If we consider it on a weekly time frame, for example, during the formation of each maximum, the RSI entered a very strong overbought zone. In the 17th year, it was about 90 marks. In the 21st year, it was 95. And in this cycle, it has also entered the heavily overbought zone twice, but so far only strong corrections have been formed from here. Yes, that is, at this point, we entered a strong overbought zone. Then there was a correction of 32% from the local highs. And the correction was also 31%. Then we look at the monthly time frame, that is, the older the time frame, the more important it is. Since everything is formed quite slowly here, and often it is from the point of view of the technical structure on the older time frames, that it is very clear to determine the overbought or undervalued zone of the asset. And they work out accordingly many times more often, yes, than some small fluctuations on the lower time frames. In the cycle of the 17th year, on the monthly time frame, the ARSA was in the area of 96. In the 21st year, by the way, from the point of view of the overheating of the asset, the first high was formed right here, at around $64,000. The RSI was at the 91 mark, that is, each previous cycle of the RSI entered the zone above 90. In this cycle, when the first peak was formed, when we updated the previous maximum, the ARSA entered the 77 zone. This is also an overbought zone, yes, but not as strong as it was in previous cycles. There has been a correction, and now at the local maximum, the ARSA has risen to the zone of 76, that is, we have not even reached the zone of 80 on the ARSA yet. Therefore, I have told in previous videos precisely from the point of view of the technical structure, yes, when Bitcoin. It is more correct to say if Bitcoin enters the zone of conditionally $130,000-$140,000 on the next wave, it will already be clearly in the zone of strong overheating, in the overbought zone on the older time frames. Therefore, in this area, you need to be as careful as possible. Of course, euphoria will begin in the market on the next wave of growth, and you will increasingly meet forecasts and statements that the bull market will continue until the 26th year. The Bitcoin goals are $200,000, $300,000, and so on. Next, we also consider the indicators of Bitcoin in each cycle on MACD. So on the weekly time frame, it has already entered the overbought zone twice, from which a fairly strong correction was formed. From the point of view of cycles, we will immediately consider it on a monthly time frame. This means that in comparison with previous cycles, the values here were constantly increasing, that is, the values of the maxima, exactly as long as Bitcoin was held in an uptrend. Yes, that is, a high was formed here, then there was a decline in the indicators, that is, there was already weakness of the asset at this point. Also, the intersection of the moving averages was formed here, and Bitcoin moved into a downtrend. At the capitulation phase, we entered the oversold area. At this point, the bottom was formed. And in this cycle, on a monthly time frame, Bitcoin has already updated the highs of the previous cycle. So far, it is holding in an uptrend, yes, but everyone should understand that it has already approached the area of strong overbought asset on the older time frames. Therefore, here, just as from the point of view of cycles, it can be assumed that the maximum will be formed already this year. And, accordingly, on the next wave of growth, when updating the maxima, Bitcoin will already enter a very strong overbought zone. According to the indicators of most indicators, oscillators, and it can be assumed that, accordingly, in the 26th year, it will be 100% it will already go into a downtrend. Everyone should adequately perceive the information. I'm not trying to dissuade someone from buying anything, or calling on them to sell Bitcoin. Yeah, I mean I'm just sharing my opinion, the decision to accept you. That is, if you are conditionally waiting for Bitcoin to grow to $200,000, this is your right, yes. In my opinion, the uptrend will end earlier than the beginning of the 26th year. First of all, it is unambiguous. And plus, of course, I don't expect a goal of $200,000 or $300,000 for Bitcoin. Share your opinion in the comments. How do you think this cycle will end at what marks, and what is more interesting, when it will end? From the point of view of a more local structure, we have a support zone in this range, the zones of the previous consolidation. Of the mark $102,900, $104,400. Exchange Bybit for successful and confident people. New users get maximum bonuses. Plus now available to new pools of liquidity, in which you can get tokens of projects staking. The link with the maximum bonuses is in the description under the video. So far, Bitcoin has lingered in this zone, testing it as support. But of the minuses, we have a zone of imbalance in this range from below, and the main support block with the largest volumes is in the zone of $93,700 and $95,000, yes. Plus, throughout the entire uptrend more locally, which starts from $74,000, all corrections occurred in the plane. That is, we did not have a strong correction in fact. This is normal for an uptrend, This often happens, but since we have summer. And why I told you that Bitcoin can spend the summer flat with a small correction, yes. We also did not have strong corrections before, if we consider local impulses, at least. In the area of 0.38 Fibonacci, yes, that is, we had minimal corrections. And accordingly, if we consider all this upward movement, from the point of view of the continuation of the uptrend, that is, it is like a bullish stage, yes, everyone should understand. I do not mean the transition of Bitcoin into a downtrend and the beginning of a bear market, but a correction to the entire growth structure. According to Fibonacci, we have a 0.5 zone, that is, it is quite an adequate conservative correction target, to which the asset can be adjusted, and it will not break its ascending structure in principle. Area 0.5 is in the $93,100 zone. This is practically combined with the main support unit, and more local goals. We have already reached the first one. Please note, we had a correction clearly to the level of 0.23. And the next potential goal is if, provided yes, that Bitcoin now goes into a stronger correction. Taking into account some negative news on the market, or about a correction on the stock market, yes, for example, and gain a foothold below the support level of 104,400, we have the next potential goal. In the area of 0.38 Fibonacci mark, $97,600. Plus, there is an imbalance zone in this zone, which Bitcoin can quickly cover with a very high probability. If the correction continues, yes, I repeat, it is on condition of fixing below the local support zones. That is, the $103,000 zone, where Bitcoin was in the consolidation phase. In other words, such a correction can be laid down more in the medium term. And after the correction is completed, accordingly, I will expect the next upward impulse. On the daily time frame, when this maximum was formed, Bitcoin also entered a strong overbought zone in principle on the ARSA, and rose to 78, so growth without correction is impossible. Everyone should understand that the market needs to unload, so to speak, eliminate the langs that often stick to hay. In the same turn, on a local downward impulse, provoke the opening of short positions, and, accordingly, then the shorts will be knocked out, and the next wave of growth will form. The inflow of investments in Bitcoin has increased again. According to the indicators for the previous week, we have formed almost a maximum. $2.9 billion have been invested in Bitcoin. The second place in terms of capital inflow is occupied by Ether, which of course cannot but rejoice. Ether attracted $326 million of investment. Of the altcoins, Solana is still the leader, $4 and $3 million. The outflow from the ERP has already begun, please note, minus $37 million. Capital inflows are also continuing in Sui, $2 and $9 million of Cardano and Chiling. I have also analyzed these coins in previous reviews. Analysts also recorded a reduction in Bitcoin balances on the wallets of some whales, that is, when these Bitcoin maxima are formed. Some whales are already slowly beginning to reduce their positions, while investors with smaller capital, on the contrary, are increasing their volumes. From the point of view of online data and statistics, the overbought zone is local. Bitcoin has $119,400 in the zone. Plus, this level will act as a kind of resistance. The complexity of Bitcoin mining has updated the highs. In general, the indicators increased by 4 to 3%. In some way, this can be considered as locally bullish indicators, so to speak, but at the same time, it is an indicator that Bitcoin is already entering, so to speak, the overheating phase. And also some positive news about the Ether. First of all, analysts have recorded the interest of whales in Ether, that is, large capital that was previously interested in Bitcoin directly has already begun to invest in Ethereum. According to the indicators of some exchanges, traders have now more actively started buying call options on Ethereum, that is, Bitcoin's indicators are now lagging behind Ether. And there was very positive news from the Consensus Company, which is one of the largest companies in the crypto market in terms of investments. Regarding the Ether, Consensus led a $425 million private equity offering for SharpLink. SharpLink Company plans to issue shares worth $1 billion to create the largest Ethereum treasury on the market. A large number of top funds, such as Panther Capital, Parafay, Electrician, and others, took part in this financing. This financing will allow you to purchase Ether as the main reserve asset. And in general, the Ether now, despite the local growth of the Bitcoin Dominance Index, is holding up quite strongly. Just as on Bitcoin the correction occurs in the plane, that is, in principle, I am satisfied with everything regarding the Ether. All of my medium-term goals that I have shown in past reviews remain relevant. I think the Ether will show itself well on the reversal of Bitcoin's dominance. Plus, in terms of the ratio to Bitcoin, the Ether is kept at local highs. In principle, it looks great. And you need to take into account that now the dominance of Bitcoin is growing, but still, that is, at the current of dominance, the Ether would have shown itself much stronger. Thank you all for your attention, friends. Share your opinion in the comments. Have a nice day and see you in the next video.